Montana Territory, August 1879. The sky over the Bitterroot Mountains burned orange with sunset and something else. Smoke. The sharp scent of pine fire pulled Jackson Vega's horse to a halt. He narrowed his eyes across the ridge, the smoke rising too thick, too fast, for just a cooking fire. He kicked his heels gently into the mare's sides. "Go on, girl," he muttered, voice low. "Someone's in trouble." He rode hard, dust spinning up behind them. The trail twisted narrow through dense pine, but he knew these woods. He had been riding supplies between Hamilton and the scattered homesteads for 3 years now, ever since he left his old life behind in Kansas. But this fire, it was coming from a place he remembered. A cabin tucked near the creek bend. He had seen it just last week, smoke rising calm and steady from the chimney. Not tonight. Tonight, the roof was half collapsed and flames licked from the windows like hungry tongues. He jumped down before the mare stopped, tying her to a half-burnt fence post. Heat pressed into his skin as he ran through the smoke, boots crunching cinders. "Is anyone inside?" he shouted. "Hello." A child's cry answered him. His heart slammed. He tore the door open with his shoulder. It gave way with a splintering crack, fire curling around the hinges. Inside, the air was thick with heat and smoke. He dropped low, crawling across the floorboards, calling out, "I'm here." "Where are you?" "Here." A woman's voice choked through the haze. "Please." He found her near the back wall, curled protectively around 2 small children, a girl and a boy, both no older than 5. Her hair stuck to her face with sweat, eyes wide with terror, but she held them tight against her chest. "I couldn't," she gasped. "I couldn't lift them both. I didn't want to leave them." "You don't have to," Jackson said, already lifting the boy into his arms. "We're getting out." He met her eyes for a second. They were brown, glassy with smoke, but sharp underneath. "Take the girl," he ordered. "Stay low, follow me." She nodded, scooping up her daughter, pressing her face into her neck. The fire climbed faster than he expected. The back rafters groaned, and as they passed under the doorway, something cracked behind them. He shielded the boy with his arms as a beam slammed down just inches away, sparks flying. They burst out into the cold night air, coughing, stumbling into the dirt. He set the boy down gently. The woman dropped beside him, her daughter clinging to her skirts. "You all right?" he asked, crouching beside her. She nodded, barely, arms wrapped tight around both children. "What's your name?" "Clara," she rasped, still catching her breath. "Clara Lowell." This was our home. Jackson glanced back at the flaming shell of the cabin. "I am sorry." She shook her head. "I do not care about the house. Just them." She looked down at the children. Zadie and Zeke. Zeke sat in the dirt, blinking up at him with glassy blue eyes. Zadie still cried, face buried in her mother's chest. "I'm Jackson," he said. "Jackson Vega. You're safe now." She met his eyes again. No panic this time, just exhaustion, and something quieter beneath it. "Gratitude." "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice cracked. He stood, stripped off his coat, and laid it gently across the children. "There's a cabin about 5 miles east. Belongs to a widow who lets riders through stay sometimes. We can make it before full dark." Clara looked down at her ruined dress, smoke-stained and torn. "I do not know if I can walk that far." He crouched in front of her. "You do not have to. We will ride." She hesitated, but when she looked at her children wrapped in his coat, she gave a small nod. They rode double on his mare, the children wrapped against her. Clara trembled from the cold and shock, but she never let go of them. Jackson kept one arm around all 3 of them as he guided them through the woods, moonlight barely breaking through the trees. By the time they reached the small cabin, Clara had stopped shaking, though her voice was thin when she thanked him again. He helped her down, then carried both children inside while she watched, quiet. The widow who lived there gave them blankets, warm stew, and quiet space. Jackson stayed outside after supper, watching the trees, letting the firelight flicker behind him. Clara came out after a while, wrapped in a blanket, hair still damp from washing. She stood beside him, silent for a long minute. She finally said, "I thought I was going to die in there. I was ready for it." He did not look at her, just stared into the trees. "You did not." "No, because of you." He turned then. Her eyes were on him, clear now, strong. "I did not know what to do," she said. "I was trying to get them out, but Zeke had twisted his ankle earlier. I could not carry both. I was not going to leave one behind." "You didn't," he said. "You held on." Clara took a breath, then looked away. "My husband passed last winter. Fever. I buried him under the elm out back. Jackson felt something shift in his chest. That is a hard thing. She nodded. I have been trying to hold us together since, but I do not know what comes next. He looked at her, really looked. Her lips were cracked, her hands blistered, but she stood steady. There was something in her that went deeper than fire, deeper than grief. You come with me, he said. She turned to him, startled. I have a place, he said. Small ranch north of Hamilton. I built it myself. I cannot just move in with a stranger. Jackson gave a tired smile. You are not a stranger anymore. Not after tonight. Clara looked down at her hands. I do not want charity. It is not charity, he said. It is a man offering help to a woman who did not let go. And maybe, I would not mind having someone to talk to again. She searched his face, cautious, but something in her softened. I do not know what I feel, she whispered. Everything happened so fast. I am not asking for anything right now, he said. Just think about it. She nodded, slow. All right. They stood there a long while, side by side, not touching, but close enough that he could feel her warmth through the blanket. And he knew, somehow, even through all the smoke and the silence, this was not just rescue. It was the beginning. Morning light filtered through the cabin's single window, casting long bars across the floorboards. Jackson stood near the hearth, tying the last loop in the bedroll he'd been given. The widow who owned the place was already gone to check on her goats, quiet as dawn. He heard soft footsteps behind him and didn't turn right away. I boiled some water, Clara said, voice husky from sleep. There's coffee if you want it. He glanced over his shoulder. She stood barefoot in the doorway, sleeves rolled high, a thin shawl gathered at her elbows. Her hair had been hastily braided, one side already loosening. Appreciate it, he said, accepting the tin cup she held out. He took a careful sip. It was bitter and hot, but it steadied something in him. Zadie and Zeke are still sleeping, she said. They didn't wake once in the night. That's good, he replied. They'll need to rest. She nodded, then leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't come through. He didn't answer. The question didn't sit right with him. Not because he hadn't thought the same, but because he didn't know what to say to it that would make any of it easier. Instead, he asked, how long were you living out there? 6 months, she said. We came up from Miles City in early spring. My husband's brother said there was land near the creek for cheap. We didn't have much choice. Wasn't much out there, Jackson said. There was enough. We had chickens, a few goats. Zeke helped with feeding. Zadie picked wild berries every morning. It was quiet, but it was ours. She paused, eyes flicking toward the window. Now it's Ash. He waited, letting the silence hold between them. She didn't feel it. You'll come with me? He asked, not pressing, but steady. She didn't respond right away. Then, softly, I don't want to go back east. My people are in Missouri, but they weren't kind when I married Thomas. They won't be kind now. Jackson took another sip, then set the cup down on the table. I meant what I said last night. I've got a place. It's not fancy, but it's dry, and there's room. I won't be a burden. No. She drew in a breath, then looked up at him. Then yes, we'll come with you. He nodded once. We'll need to leave by midday. I'll ride into town, get supplies. You'll rest here with the twins. They're not twins, Clara said. Zeke's a year older. He blinked, surprised. They look near the same. Zeke's always been small, she said with a faint smile. Born early. But he's stronger than he looks. Jackson picked up his hat from the peg. I'll be back by noon. Clara stepped aside to let him pass, then touched his arm lightly as he reached the door. Thank you. He met her eyes. You don't owe me thanks. I do, she said. But I'll find a way to return it. He left before he could answer. The trail into Hamilton was dry and rutted, the dust clinging to his boots by the time he tied off his mare near the general store. He filled his list quickly. Flour, beans, salt pork, clean clothes for the children, a few things for Clara, nothing fine, just practical. The shopkeeper, an older woman with sharp eyes, glanced at him as he paid. You taking in a family? She asked. Something like that, Jackson said. Well, you picked a good day for it. Storm's coming tomorrow. Sky's been heavy all morning. He looked up. She was right, clouds had begun to gather over the ridgeline, thick and low. He rode back fast, the wind already shifting. When he reached the cabin, Clara was outside with the children, showing them how to braid thin strips of cloth into rope. Zeke was quiet, focused. Zadie hummed under her breath, fingers clumsy but determined. Clara stood when she saw him, brushing her hands on her skirt. You found everything? He dismounted and untied the bundles from the saddle. We'll head out now. I want to beat the storm. She packed quickly, folding the spare things into a half-full sack. Zeke limped a little as he walked, but didn't complain. Zadie clutched a small doll made of straw and string, and Clara didn't try to take it from her. They rode together, slower this time. Clara held the reins while Jackson led them on foot when the trail narrowed. The air grew heavy, as if the sky held its breath. Thunder rumbled low in the distance by the time his cabin came into view. It sat on a gentle rise above a wide field, rough-hewn logs, and a stone chimney. The porch creaked underfoot as he carried Zeke inside. Zadie followed, rubbing her eyes. Clara stepped in last, quiet. He lit the lamp, and the room came to life in warm gold. The walls were lined with shelves of tools, tins, and a few books. A single bed stood against the wall, and a cot leaned folded near the hearth. "I'll take the cot," Jackson said. "You and the children take the bed." Clara ran her fingers over the quilt folded at the foot of it. "Did you make this?" "My sister did. Sent it from Abilene before she passed." Clara smoothed the corner. "It's beautiful." Rain began to fall in steady sheets outside. The wind rattled the shutters. Inside, the air was warm. Safe. Zeke and Zadie curled together on the bed, already half asleep. Clara sat beside them, one hand resting protectively over their legs. Jackson stood by the window, watching the storm roll in. Clara looked up at him. Her voice was quiet, but certain. "We'll stay." By the second day at Jackson's homestead, the rain had passed, leaving deep ruts in the field and a silver sheen to the pines along the ridge. Clara stood at the edge of the porch, Zadie balanced on her hip, watching as Jackson and Zeke worked near the barn. The boy's limp slowed him, but he matched Jackson's pace as best he could, carrying kindling from the woodpile with both arms tight to his chest. "Careful, Zeke," Clara called. "Don't rush." "I'm not," he said, eyes on Jackson, not her. Jackson handed the boy a smaller bundle. "That's enough for now. We'll stack the rest later." Zeke nodded, chest puffed a little. Clara set Zadie down and stepped into the yard. The girl followed, dragging a stick through the mud, humming something tuneless. Clara reached Jackson as he opened the barn door, the wood groaning under his hand. "Do you need help with anything in there?" she asked. He looked at her, then stepped aside. "If you don't mind dust." The barn was dim, the scent of hay and old leather settling thick in the air. Tools hung along the back wall, orderly but worn. A few feed sacks sat slumped near the door. "I've been meaning to clean out the loft," he said. "It's dry up there. Could be made into something useful." Clara ran her hand over one of the beams. "I could help sort it. Might be good to have space for the children to sleep once Zeke's leg heals. Give them their own corner." Jackson leaned on the pitchfork handle. "You'd want to stay long enough to make room for that?" She met his eyes. "I said we'd stay. I don't say things I don't mean." He nodded slowly. "I know." Zadie's voice echoed from outside. "Mama, come see." Clara stepped back into the light, brushing her skirt. Zadie had dropped to her knees near the lilac bush, hands buried in the wet soil. "There's worms," the girl said brightly. "So many." "Don't bring them inside," Clara warned, crouching beside her. "They belong here." Zeke limped over, cheeks flushed. "Can I feed the chickens?" Jackson glanced toward the coop. "If you go slow. Don't let them out." The boy grinned and hobbled off. Clara straightened and dusted her palms. Jackson stood a few paces away, watching her quietly. "You always this calm?" he asked. Her brow lifted. "You mean after losing everything?" "I mean now. With them. You carry yourself like someone used to being alone, but you don't act like it's a burden." Clara let out a breath. "I was raised on a river farm outside St. Charles. My father had his own way of showing love, mostly through chores. But I learned early if I panicked, nothing got done." Jackson nodded once. "You miss it?" "No," she said. "I miss the sound of frogs at night. I miss the smell of bread baking. But I don't miss the rest." He didn't press. The sky turned gold at the edges. Clara went back inside to start a broth. The fire had burned low, but the coals were still warm. She stirred in dried onions and barley while the children played with a length of twine, laughing softly. Later, as the wind picked up outside, Jackson came in with his arms full of chopped wood. He stacked it by the hearth, then took off his coat and hung it on the peg. "Storm's not done yet," he said. "Clouds are thick over the pass." Clara poured broth into bowls, setting them on the small table. She handed one to him without a word. They ate quietly. The children, too tired to speak much, leaned against each other. After the dishes were rinsed and the children tucked into bed, Clara stood by the window. The rain had returned, gentler this time. A quiet hush settled over the cabin. Jackson sat by the fire, coat folded over one knee, mending a torn seam with a needle thick as a nail. She turned toward him. "You always make do like this?" He looked up. "Don't have much choice." Clara crossed the room, sat across from him. The fire cast long shadows between them. She reached for her knitting, the needles moving slow and steady in her hands. "Did you ever want a family of your own?" she asked. He paused, thread drawn taut. "I did once." She waited. "My wife died in childbirth," he said. "Out near Abilene. That's why I came west." Clara's hands stilled. "I'm sorry." He nodded. "It was a long time ago." They sat in the hush of the fire, the storm whispering against the shutters. Clara leaned back in the chair, her voice low. "I never expected to find safety again. Especially not like this." Jackson didn't speak, but he set the coat aside and looked at her not with pity, not with caution, but with quiet recognition. Clara met his gaze and didn't look away. The fire cracked between them, and without either one saying it, something passed between their silence. Not a promise. Not yet. But the shape of something beginning to take root. The next morning brought clear skies and a pale wind that carried the scent of wet earth. Clara hung the children's damp clothes along the fence rail after breakfast, pinning them with care while the sun stretched low over the ridge. Zadie wandered nearby, dragging a stick through the soft dirt in slow circles, while Zeke sat on a stump near the porch, his legs stretched straight, whittling a smooth branch with the small knife Jackson had given him. Jackson was out in the north pasture, mending the top rail of the fence that had buckled under the weight of sodden pine branches. Clara watched him from a distance, the way his shoulders moved steady and slow, the way he paused to brush sawdust from his sleeve. He hadn't spoken much over breakfast, but there'd been something in the way he handed her the coffee gentle, like he'd been waiting for her to speak first. She hadn't, not yet. By midday, she ladled stew into bowls and carried them out to the porch. Zeke set down his carving and joined her without a word. Zadie continued her game with a stone and a tin cup, murmuring softly to herself. Clara watched the trail for Jackson, but he didn't return until the sun had climbed high. He came up the slope with his hat in one hand, the other brushing twigs from his shirt. His face was flushed from the sun, but his eyes met hers the moment he reached the porch. "Fence'll hold another season," he said, wiping his brow. "Might need new posts come spring." Clara handed him a bowl. "We'll plan for it." He sat on the step just below her, their knees nearly touching. He ate slowly, the silence between them comfortable but waiting. She set her bowl aside. "When I was 16, I thought I'd end up in St. Louis. I wanted to teach. My aunt there had a parlor school for girls. She promised me a place." Jackson didn't move, just listened. "But then I met Thomas," she said, "and everything I thought I wanted shifted. He had a way of making you feel like the ground under your feet was yours if he was standing on it too." She paused, studying her hands. "I still think about that sometimes. Who I'd have been if I took the train instead." Jackson leaned back against the post. "You think you'd go back to that idea now?" "I'm not sure it fits anymore," she said. "The world feels smaller now, but truer too." He set his bowl down beside hers. "I never had a plan past surviving the next season. I worked cattle, drove freight, built this place one board at a time. Never thought I'd have anyone to build it for but myself." Clara looked at him. "And now?" His gaze stayed on the trees beyond the field. "Now I wonder what it'd feel like to build it with someone. Not just for them. With them." Zadie crawled into her lap then, tugging at her sleeve. Clara smoothed the girl's hair, then looked back at Jackson. "I don't know how to do this slow," she said. "You don't have to," he answered. She tilted her head. "But we should." That drew the corner of his mouth up, not quite a smile, but something close. Later that afternoon, Clara took the children down to the creek below the ridge. The water was cold, but clear, and the banks were lined with mint and smooth river stones. Zeke hobbled carefully across the shallows, collecting flat rocks, while Zadie splashed barefoot near the edge. Clara sat on a sun-warmed boulder, skirt tucked beneath her, watching the way the light played on the water. Jackson approached from the trees, a small tin pail in hand. "Found a patch of blackberries just west of the trail. Thought the children might want some." "They'll ruin their supper," she said, taking the pail. "They'll be happier for it." She plucked one from the top, held it to her lips, then paused. Did you ever think you'd be raising someone else's children? No, he said. But I don't mind the thought. She let the berry fall into her mouth, then handed the pail to Zadie, who squealed and ran to show her brother. Jackson sat beside Clara on the rock, boots pressed into the damp earth. He didn't look at her right away. She said, I'm not ready to be anyone's wife again, but I'm not afraid of what's ahead. Not anymore. He nodded. I don't need an answer. Just a place in the truth. You've got it, she said. They sat together, the creek winding slow beside them, the children's laughter rising through the trees. No promises. Just the quiet certainty of something steady beginning to grow. The frost came early that year, curling around the eaves and settling along the valley floor in a thin white hush. Jackson stood beside the barn, hammer in hand, fitting new hinges to the side door before the first hard snow made the wood swell. Clara approached from the garden path, her shawl pulled tight, cheeks flushed from the cold. I dug out the last of the carrots, she said, holding up a basket. They kept better than I expected. He set the hammer down and wiped his hands on his trousers. You always surprise me with what you managed to coax out of that patch. Clara smiled, but there was a tiredness at the edges of her eyes. Zeke's fever eased last night. He's still pale, but the worst passed. Jackson nodded, quiet for a moment. I was up late. Heard you walking the floor. I didn't want to wake you. You didn't. She looked out across the field, where Zadie was gathering dry twigs in her apron, her wool cap askew. I thought I'd lost him, Jackson. Just for a moment. He was so still. He took a breath. You didn't. He's a strong boy. I know. But I've lived through too many goodbyes. He reached out, resting a hand lightly on her forearm. You're not alone this time. She held his gaze. Sometimes I forget that. Jackson tilted his head slightly. You shouldn't have to keep reminding yourself. They stood there, the cold air moving soft between them, until Zadie's voice called from the porch. Mama, come see what I found. Clara turned, her face easing. I'll be in soon. After she went inside with the basket, Jackson finished hanging the door, then checked the tack and feed. He paused near the stall where the mare stood quietly, brushing her shoulder with even strokes. The stillness of the barn gave him room to think about the way Clara's voice had changed lately, steadier, less guarded. About the way Zeke had started asking questions about fence lines and weather. About the way Zadie had taken to following him every morning, pretending to measure the sky. By week's end, the first snow fell, light and dry, blanketing the hills. Inside the cabin, the hearth crackled steady. Clara stitched by lamplight while Zeke read aloud in a halting rhythm from an old reader Jackson had brought from town. Zadie leaned against her mother's side, half asleep. Jackson sat on the floor, relacing a worn pair of boots. When Zeke reached the end of the page, Clara set her sewing aside. You've gotten better, she said. Your letters are clearer now. Zeke beamed. Mama, can I read to Mr. Jackson tomorrow too? You can read to me anytime, Jackson said. Clara met his eyes briefly, then turned to the children. Time for bed. They protested, but only half-heartedly. Once the children were settled behind the curtain that now hung across the corner of the cabin, Clara returned to the fire. Jackson poured 2 cups of warmed cider and handed her one. I've been meaning to ask, he said, what you plan to do with that cloth you've been sewing. She sipped from the cup. It's for the windows. I thought it might help keep the drafts out. He nodded. Practical. She hesitated, then set the cup down. I've also been thinking about the spring. What about it? I want to plant more. Not just vegetables. Flowers too. Something for the bees. He smiled. We've got the space. I'd also like to teach Zeke his numbers properly. And Zadie started humming the same tune every day. I think she's trying to make up songs. You've got plans, he said. I do. They were quiet again. Then Clara said, I used to imagine peace as something far away. Soft and distant. But this here, now it's not soft. It's steady. It's work. But it holds. Jackson set his cup down and reached for her hand. I'd like to build it with you. All of it. If you'll have me. Her fingers closed around his. I will. He rose and extended his hand fully. She stood, and he pulled her close. Her forehead rested against his jaw, her breath warm against his skin. She whispered, I didn't think I'd ever feel something like this again. He answered, neither did I. That night, they lay beside one another for the first time, the fire burning low. No words were needed. The rhythm of breath, the quiet weight of trust, spoke enough. Outside, the snow fell heavier, but inside, The warmth held. By early spring, the cabin had changed. The curtains Clara made hung neatly in each window. Zeke helped Jackson rebuild the lean-to. Zadie carried seeds in her apron, scattering them where Clara pointed. A new fence post stood at the edge of the field, carved with a small mark, a flower and a bird, side by side. On a warm April morning, Clara stood at the porch railing with her hands resting over her middle, her eyes on the horizon. Jackson came to her side. "You feel all right?" She nodded. "Just tired. It's different this time." He wrapped an arm around her waist. "We'll manage." "We always do," she said. That afternoon, they married beneath the cottonwoods past the creek. The widow from the ridge came to witness, and the children gathered wildflowers by the stream. Clara wore the same shawl she'd arrived in, though it had been mended and rehemmed. Jackson wore his best shirt, collar slightly askew. They spoke their vows low, without flourish. Just truth. When they kissed, Zadie clapped her hands, and Zeke stood tall beside them, a boy already leaning into pride. That night, as the lantern burned low and the fire faded to embers, Clara rested her hand over Jackson's heart and said, "You gave me more than safety." He answered, "You gave me home." And neither needed to say anything more. They lived long and steady, through seasons of rain and sun, through hard days and good ones. The children grew, and laughter filled the corners of the house. The garden bloomed each spring with more than vegetables. And in the quiet hours, when the air was still and the world felt gentle, they held each other close, knowing that love, when built slow and true, never burned out. It endured.